People watch me on TV and they think like, oh, Emily Graslie, she's all like bubbly and everything, but this is what like really gets me going, because we're not doing this just for fun. We're having a fun time doing it, but like, let's not undermine the critical value that we have with our platform. The reason we want to shout it from the rooftops is because existentially, in the fiber of our very being, this is what drives us as humans. Why is it so hard to just get paid to do this work? Like, science communication, we shouldn't be the anomaly. Like, this should be the society that we're attempting to support.
Starting out, maybe each of you could briefly, whoever wants to start can go first, just talk about what drew you to science communication / science education through digital platforms rather than more traditional media, such as academic journals, traditional science documentary, etc.
I would love to just jump right into this.
Get in there.
So I graduated from the University of Montana in 2011 with a degree in painting, fine art, and I was never good at science, never thought I would be, anywhere near that side of campus. So it wasn't until I was about a semester away from graduating that I found the, zoological museum on our campus. And if you guys just saw The Feather Detective, that was me. That was the girl showing up, feeling out of place, being like, what is going on here? Who are you? Why are you cutting up dead birds? And can I do it? And so I kind of muscled my way as a volunteer into the Zoological Museum. By the time I graduated, I had strong-armed myself to be like a full-time volunteer and became, so I was like working at a bakery early in the morning, working at the museum, and then going back to do another prep chef job. So it was not sustainable. But the way that this transformed into YouTube was I initially started posting pictures of specimen preparation on my Facebook. Not the target audience. My family started reaching out. They're like, are you okay? Like, what's going on here? What's with all these dead animals? So I started a Tumblr in 2011. And so we go back, right? So the Tumblr started, and then by the, what was amazing about where I was, I happened to live in the same town as Hank Green, who has now established Complexly, SciShow, and all of these fantastic educational programs. So Hank found me in this museum where I was just giving him a tour, and I was just losing my mind. And he came back later, he's like, you know what, I think maybe we should put you on camera. And so he literally showed up, put a camera in my face. That day, I didn't know I was gonna be on YouTube. We filmed on a Wednesday, posted the video on a Friday. By Monday morning, he sent me an email with the subject matter that just said, that went well, because it had blown up. And so all these comments, thousands of comments just said, Emily needs her own YouTube channel. Hank was like, all right, this is a big experiment. 2013, I launched The Brain Scoop. 4 months later, I got a full-time job at the Field Museum in Chicago. And I don't think that pathway exists anymore. So that's why I'm excited to talk about this. And I got into science because I didn't see any women on YouTube. So I think that was like how I got my foot in the door. I was like, and Hank came to me and he was like, we need more representation. It doesn't matter if you are a scientist. In fact, it's probably better if you're not. If we really want to reach the widest amount of people possible, most people aren't scientists. So we got to put non-scientists up there. So from that moment, like as a non-scientist, I became a conduit for the audience. I also became the first woman to have her own YouTube channel, and like shortly before a lot of others like came in and filled the space as well. But like that, seeing the lack of representation like gave me the confidence to be like, all right, I might not be the best, but I'm gonna show up first. So that's my story.
Thank you.
I'm gonna hop in right after you because I was on YouTube when you started your channel, but I wasn't doing it the same way as the YouTubers and the way that,
Oh,
what
my
is
bad.
considered
I take it back.
a YouTuber.
I didn't do my research. I'm sorry, Kiki.
I had a channel, but I barely put anything on there except for like weird little videos that I was making, and it was not popular, and my podcast was the thing, right? So I got started doing podcasting before podcasting was podcasting. I started This Week in Science as a college radio show, and the reason I started it is that Science Friday was the only science show on the radio, and I had an in at the radio station, and I said, I'm going to do a science program, and they said, okay, why don't you just try it out? And so it was a half-hour-long show once a week, and then it became an hour-long show once a week, and I was recording the show on cassette tape, and then technology advanced, and we had MP3 recorders and like mini discs. And so I have a box of mini discs at home with like early episodes and everything. Those MP3s ended up being files that I could put on my website. So around 2003, 2004, I was putting MP3s on the website, and we made an RSS feed, and people started downloading the podcast and subscribed to it. We had like 10 subscribers, and then we had 100 subscribers, and then Apple, with their iPod, they had their podcasts. They opened up the podcast directory, and back in the old days, you just had to submit your podcast to these random podcast directories. And so I submitted to the Apple podcast directory, and ta-da! Then we had 1,000 downloads, and oh my gosh, and the numbers kept going up. And suddenly I was talking to people around the world, not just in Davis, California. And it became this really amazing opportunity back in the mid-2000s to be able to actually have this voice that was beyond terrestrial radio, and I was able to talk with people about evolution versus creationism. I was able to talk about the things that I was learning in my neuroscience degree program. I was, all these things. But the key that I've always followed is the technology and being adaptable to the transformations that advancing technologies and changing technologies allow for the creation of media and the communication of ideas with audiences.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I started science communication relatively recently. So I went to school for zoology with the intention of working with big cats. That was my experience throughout getting my degree. But I graduated in 2020, and so they were not hiring. Places with animal care were not hiring. So I was living with my parents, and I was telling them all these facts that I learned while in college, and they were kind of like, can you tell somebody else? So I downloaded TikTok, and it was really cool to just be able to upload a video from my room talking about everything that I learned in college and reach an audience of, any varying size. But I initially started off with let me tell you about reproductive selection, and those videos did not do very well. The videos that did well were what's this really freaky worm? Let me explain this really freaky creature that just went viral. And I ended up gaining a following by just trying to navigate what people were looking for. That eventually led me to YouTube, where I was able to expand more on the videos because there wasn't a time limit anymore. And I found that I really, really enjoyed being able to research like I was in college. That was something that I was afraid of losing when I graduated, was this continuous ability to learn in kind of a university setting. And I feel like I'm still able to do that now by researching for my videos, which is really awesome.
Thank you so much.
For me, I'm almost embarrassed to talk because it feels so similar. So many of the same themes are coming up here. But for me, I think so. I was a similar sort of scrappy start. I was like a broke grad student who didn't know what he was doing. I studied theater, and then all of a sudden I was too timid to become a playwright, so I was I guess I'll go to grad school. And then so then I studied the history of science, and then I just completely fell in love with that field. And then I kind of to your question of there are all these options, what you could have done academic publishing or this thing or that thing. And I would learn things, and I'd be like, wow, this is amazing. The world, how does nobody know this? All the people in my grad student program, all the professors and the students, they all acted like they already knew this stuff and it wasn't that interesting. And then when nobody else would know all that, and I was like, how is this, how is it so obvious and boring to you? And then it's so not obvious and if you frame it right, not boring to all these people. It just didn't make sense. And so I would get evangelical. I would learn some tiny thing, and I would just be everybody needs to know this. This is crazy.
Have you heard about freshwater clams?
Yeah, that kind of thing. And so I would just so then what I would do is because that's the normal way to do it, and that's what everyone would tell me to do, is like I would like write it up to be a scholarly journal article, and then I would just get rejected over and over and over again because I wasn't following the format, or I wanted to keep in a stupid joke or whatever it was. And then I was like, then that's when around that time was when I first heard Radiolab was one of the first podcasts I ever heard, and I was like, oh, this feels right. Like, this feels like the way I tell stories. Like, it has, a lot of emotions, and it has like plot, and it's funny, and it's dumb, but it's smart. It was like kind of all of those things. And I was like, oh, this feels right. And so then I started pitching them. I just like cold emailed and then cold called them. And I was like, hey, hi, you don't know who I am. I'm like a grad student who studies the history of science, but here's a bunch of story ideas. And then the first time I called, it was the executive producer, her name was Ellen Horn, and she listened to all my ideas. I had like 10 ideas, and then she rejected every one of them. But then she was like, hey, but I never heard any of these ideas before, at least, so why don't you keep sending us ideas? So I kept doing that, and that was exciting and fun. And then I similarly, at the same time, like the Boston Globe Ideas section was this like amazing thing that I would always read, and then I would try to, so I was like pitching them, I was pitching Radiolab, but like, then I was like, oh, this is hard too. These people are rejecting me all the time too.
I can't win.
Yeah, and like for me, all I wanted to do was like go to the rooftops and yell out about some, like, do you know they used to do like coffee enemas up the butt for this whatever? Like I would learn some random thing from the history of medicine. I'm like, this is amazing, and I just wanted to tell everybody about it, and there was no way to do that. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll go on Twitter maybe. And then that's kind of what happened. Like I just would keep pitching, and every once in a while, like one story would get through in newspaper or in podcast or in another medium. But it's just like, to me, I don't know. I just like I feel like the place that this comes from is like I'm curious, so I go out and like I learn stuff, and then I learn like really interesting stuff, and then I want everybody to know it, and then there's like no way to do it, and I get like intellectually constipated kind of. And I'm like, everybody needs to know this thing. And then it's like, there's got to be a way. Like, I got to find a way to tell everybody this thing. And maybe it's like Radiolab or TikTok or this thing or that thing. But it's just like finding a way. Like, it's like finding a way to get everybody to know this one little thing. And I don't know why everybody needs to know it, but it really feels like everybody needs to know this random thing.
Awesome, thank you.
I love hearing everyone's stories, because I think similar to me, it's like I got into storytelling and science communication. I went to UC Berkeley and did environmental science, and growing up in poverty, I didn't really see anyone who looked like me from the LGBTQ identity, but also brown. And in the environmental science field, I remember just recognizing, I'm like, I can't even name 5 black environmentalists, 5 indigenous environmentalists, 5 Latino environmentalists, 5 Asian environmentalists. And so I think for me, like, honestly, when I was in academia, I wasn't the naturally intelligent one that like knew how to do everything. I always had to push hard. I had a lot of great mentors that helped me kind of develop myself in the research field, the academic field, but also the communication field. And I think I remember like graduating in 2018, I wanted to get a job at the green environmental nonprofits out there, like Greenpeace and RDC. So I applied for a digital media strategist role that would use, media and research and communication. And that was really like my dream job. I ended up getting rejected from all of them, but I did get really good feedback. They said I didn't have any good climate media work documented. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that means. Because I'm like, in academia, they don't teach you that. They just teach you how to, be a scientist and to think these certain ways. And I worked in the fashion industry, was actually an agent for one of the modeling agencies in New York City, which is crazy because my friends were like, how'd you go from science to the fashion industry? And I'm like, I don't know, life took me there. And I remember like, I also had a private Tumblr blog where I would talk about spirituality, climate, and education, but I kept my identity anonymous. And I remember my friend was telling me like, why don't you have like thousands of followers on here, why don't you create an account like of yourself? And I'm like, I don't know, I don't want to center myself or take up space in the media space. Like, there's other people that deserve it. And she dragged me and she's like, no, she's like, create your account now. So we came up with Queer Brown Vegan, which is why it's named that way. But it was also just to make sure like, no one needs to question who I am, my identity, whatever. And when I created it, I remember just talking a lot about like from food, energy, like policy, about like how do we talk about environmentalism through a working class lens? Like how can I talk about the fact that the ways that environmental pollution affected my body today, that I have a chronic illness, and how do I communicate that to people who may be suffering from health-related issues now, and lived in an environment that was toxic and didn't know that they were being poisoned as we speak. So I think for me, like that really helped me develop the ways that I communicate, but also using education not as a tool for authority, but rather empowerment. Because I think sometimes in science fields we try to, not in these fields, but like the ways that I was learning sometimes was almost seen like, if you don't understand this, you are inferior, therefore you're not smart enough to talk about this subject. And so I kind of promoted my work as a way of like, through a teacher lens of like how you would teach a young person or how you would teach someone. And so I honestly just been doing this full time since 2019, and it's been a huge privilege for it to be my career.
Thank you. Maybe we'll use that as a bit of a jumping off point moving forward. So Isaias, everything that you've said already is so beautiful, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of the way that intersectionality has found its way into your platform, and how specifically social media as a medium helps you to address complex topics that might be overlooked in mainstream science education. So like, for instance, you have a whole segment on petromasculinity and petrofeminism. And maybe you could speak a little bit more about your experience, how social media helps develop a conversation around topics such as that.
Yeah, I mean, I think back, in the 2010s digital media, I think we had a better culture than we do today, for sure. But I think that, my primary platform when I first started was actually Instagram, then TikTok. But Instagram really kind of gave me a place to actually write out my thoughts and concretize them on like a board. And I think the issue with science communication and the way that I saw it is that a lot of the science communicators I saw would talk about all these like really cool concepts, make it accessible for me, but then there was this missing cultural component of like, and that's okay, that they don't need to add their lived experiences. I think every science communicator has a different way. But for me, I was like, I need to talk about the fact that I can't just talk about these types of terminologies that are coming from academia and the environment. Like, for example, like petromasculinity was coined by Professor Kara Daggett to basically look in the ways that how we have essentially given power to the fossil fuel industries and almost made them this patriarchal power that are not just committing forms of ecocide, but also genocide, femicide to indigenous women. And so this, for me, like the ways that I communicate it isn't just so much like, this is the terminology and this is what you should get. Mm-hmm. It's more like, let's actually zoom out and understand like how do we look at the fossil fuel industry through this culture of how do they masculinize it? How do they make men feel when they advertise the selling of cars? Or to tell women, oh, if your man is not driving a fossil fuel car, that means you're not in a perfect marriage. That means he's an issue. And so like really coming back from a cultural lens is that when you give people this idea of intersectionality, which sometimes people try to be like, I don't want to talk about intersectionality, it allows us to actually become better people to make decisions and to understand those issues. And so I think for me, like intersectional environmentalism isn't just a form of like we're advocating for the conservation of non-human species, but we're actually kind of advocating for the marginalized people who are also protecting those species amongst us. I don't think that when we talk about environmentalism in my field, like whenever someone's just trying to separate themselves from me, I'm like, no, like we are nature, we know that, we've been studying that, and we know that we really can't save one another without each other.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe we can pivot a bit to talk about social media more generally too, and it as a form. So Lindsay, maybe you could talk a little bit, jumping off of what Isaias has already just said, about how, especially because a lot of your work advocates also for the non-human community and for the animal community, how do you negotiate working on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, TikTok specifically, that has a time limit? 30 seconds, right?
It's longer now. It used to be a
Okay.
minute.
Right. Okay. How do you navigate having a time limit to having to communicate a certain idea and negotiating, advocating for a non-human community and having to work within a limit, and also being this, all of you sort of navigate this in your work, or you directly navigate this in your work. There's an authenticity and an immediacy and an accessibility to the way that you approach your thinking and the way that you approach communicating. And yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about how you navigate that specifically in the social media space.
It's definitely different between short form and long form content. I think I want to start with long form content. I think I've found a good way to present myself as a friend, learning the information along with the person I'm presenting to, because I think that level of friendliness is especially important now, so that somebody doesn't feel bad for not knowing it beforehand and can feel like they're learning it along with me. That's been harder to navigate in short form content, and I think when I'm trying to get a specific message across, I try to save it for the very end so that it doesn't start off with like, I'm telling you how you should change your mind. I try to lead up with more general fun information and then kind of put the message at the end. Yeah, it's definitely hard. It's hard to navigate with a time limit, but I also think that it allows for the message to be simpler, which is good for some topics. It's, you know, it doesn't really work for others, and YouTube and long form content is great for being able to say, I'm not really sure about how I'm telling you this information right now, or I'm not really sure where I stand on this, and you can kind of make your own opinion based on all of the information that I present to you. And so I've started to lean more into long form content for that reason. Yeah, I'm still having trouble with short form.
How long is your long form?
It ranges from 15 minutes. My longest video is like an hour and a half long.
Dang. Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's just my microphone that has this feedback, but I can lean to the side. Thank you so much for that. Maybe we can broaden it from the social media scope into longer form, because all three of the rest of us here work in both medium form and longer form content. And so maybe we'll start with you, Emily. So you've worked with both within a major institution and as an independent producer. How do you see the relationship between traditional scientific authorities and independent creators evolving? I know that's a big question.
Say that again? Let me wrap my head around that.
Okay, so you both worked in a major institution and as an independent producer.
Yes.
And you started I know that you started your YouTube channel and then it went away for a bit and then it came back.
Yeah.
And so there's been some navigations there.
Yes.
And so how do you see the relationship between traditional scientific authorities, so the institutional authority, and independent creators evolving? Because I know you've had a specific experience.
Yeah, I had trial by fire, you know. So I started this fun and games in a zoological museum where there was one curator, and he was part-time, and his name was Dave. He was a phenomenal mentor for me. He was really the one that empowered me to feel like I could lead, you know, a tour of hobbyists through the museum. I could contribute to faunal identification. This is something that I didn't know that I was good at as an artist. You can look at, we do a lot of like comparative morphology. So how does the femur bone of a horse look like the femur bone of a mouse? And if you're an archaeologist or an anthropologist and you're excavating, you know, let's say a site in the Pacific Northwest, it's really valuable to know what kind of like fish bones you're finding in these pits. So anyway, it's easier for an artist to teach the faunal analysis and comparative things because we're trained to do that, right? Whereas like a scientist isn't trained to draw a horse femur and compare that visually to like a mouse femur. So that was one of the first things where I was like, oh, art actually does have a very valid place in the world of science. And it was enough, like, the Brain Scoop had enough enthusiasm that the Field Museum very quickly was like, I don't know what this girl is about, but let's snatch her up. It was really about like, let's get her before anybody else can get her. And that was kind of the end of their thought process. I showed up, I didn't have a computer. I was like, who's my full-time camera person? They're like, you don't film all this and edit it all on your own? And so it was at a really challenging political time where the Field Museum was going through this like reckoning of how are we communicating about our science, because it was this transitionary period between like old guard and new guard. And so when I was brought in, I was plopped in front of a bunch of senior curators and science staff, and they were like, Emily's gonna tell everybody about your work. And everyone was like, no, you're not. So I partnered with the people who saw the brain scoop and saw the potential, and that happened to be the younger people in the museum, the women, the students, the people of color, who saw the potential of this new media and who wanted to help me shape the stories. And after a while, you get this traction, you get recognition, and all of a sudden these poo-pooers are like, you know, some guy who never took the time of day to actually talk to me or learn about my work or whatever. I find myself in an elevator with this guy, and he just turns to me and he's like, why haven't you done a video about my work yet? And I'm like, you don't get to make, that is where the democratization comes in.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
That was me being like, no, I actually get to pick what's on the show. It was great that I had that creative freedom. But it was one of those things, like the museum owned the show. By the time sort of like a product of my employment agreement was to sell the intellectual property to the museum. I was 23 and had $400 in my bank account. And so, you know, I had that organizational support as long as I did, but by the time I left the museum, I had to leave my show behind, and it was like a reset. People are like, Emily who? You know, it was just a complete blow to try and figure out, how am I gonna rebuild this career? And man, it was one failure after another between 2020 and like 2023, and I finally got to the point where I went to a conference where you were at like 2 years ago, and somebody came up to me and they're like, why don't you just ask him one more time if he can have the show back? And it just happened to be the perfect point of time where, you know, a marketing guy got fired who didn't want me to have the show, and a woman got promoted in the legal team, and she helped me like pretty quickly, within a few weeks, like reallocate the show and give it back to me. And so like I got my credibility back, and now I'm here. Like now I get to be in the field again, and it was really challenging to try and reset and plant my feet again and be like, no, I did this work. I put in the effort. I did the research. Nobody wrote this stuff. I figured this out. I taught myself the science in collaboration with the people who valued what I was doing. I couldn't have done it without them. But like the gap that exists now is, you know, I had to try and get federal funding, basically, and we all know how that panned out, or I can talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, it's a struggle. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well,
Absolutely, yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Yeah, like, so what was the value of being with and in the Fields Museum? Like, if you could do it again, would you just not have done it at all, or was there actually value being there?
Oh, there was a tremendous amount of value, because I had, again, like I was an artist, I have $400 in my bank account. I was just this goofy YouTuber who had this opportunity. I had no idea where it was going to go. And I completely lost my train of thought. Sorry, say
No,
that.
that's okay.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, you answered, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. So we'll move to you, Kiki. So talking a little bit more about how you negotiate communicating content, this week in science in particular, has a lot of intellectual and scientific rigor within it, between you and your co-hosts, but also there's a lot of humor and levity. And so we can open up this conversation more to all of us, but starting with you, how do you maintain factual accuracy and communicating these topics that are integral and essential to be put forth, while making content entertaining or accessible enough to compete for the attention of the audience?
Yeah, I mean, attention that's the key, right? And a lot of times we think about attention as for consumers of media, and I like thinking of what I'm doing as a conversation. And so my co-hosts and we have our own areas of expertise that we can rely on, and then we also make sure that we are, you know, versed in the stories that we're talking about, that we've done our research. We're not just coming in going, hey, science, you know. But our ability to have a conversation together is also engaging and allowing our audience to have a conversation with us as well. And when I don't know something about one of the stories that someone's brought in, I can ask them and say, well, what about this? Or do you know how this works? Have we thought about how the scientists might have approached this differently? Like, why did they ask that? And so part of the process of what we do is it's rooted in the studies themselves, the methods, the results. But the conversation is all about the questions and being able to ask. There's no stupid questions, right? I can ask whatever I want, but it's also, we're friends. We're having a conversation. It's all about, we want to be credible resources and sources of information, but we also want to be, the drive time radio DJ for science, like I'm in your car and you can yell at me while you're listening to me if you want. Kiki, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. No, Blair. Traumatic insemination. I swear. No.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Bedbugs do it.
Yeah, and if you imagine we have serious conversations because there's a time and a place for serious conversations, but there's also room for levity and humor and enjoying the process of learning and asking questions and inviting other people to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
And speaking of long form, I think my longest show is like 3.5 hours.
Oh my God. That's unbelievable.
We live stream the show, so the recording process is live, and so we're just there hanging out as long as it takes. But sometimes we're like, okay, the tight 90. We're really going to get 90 minutes. Really? No.
What happened? Why was it 3.5 hours?
We were talking with a researcher. We invite researchers in for interviews sometimes, and Dr. Brian Hare from Duke University, he came on to talk about, I think he was talking about, it wasn't dogs. No, it was animal cognition, and it was just a fascinating conversation. We ended up talking about, he had done field research in Africa with bonobos and with his wife Vanessa, and so we talked about bonobos, and we talked about, anthropomorphizing these human-like, our closest relatives, right? And the anthropomorphization and like the expectations of how, looking at their behaviors, and we just, and he was on East Coast time too. It was like 1 a.m. by the time he was late.
Well, I feel like those conversations could go on forever.
So, it was so fun.
Yeah.
We just have fun.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Speaking of anthropomorphizing and entertainment in podcasting, Latif, Radiolab specifically, and your show is so distinctive, specifically in its sound design and its development of stories. Even your most recent episode, the first known earthly voice, speaks a lot about song, the cricket song, the whale song, in comparison to the human voice, especially as it relates to taking testosterone.
Yep.
And so you make, and in your work in Connected as well, you make these connections, these very seemingly arbitrary connections between disparate things. And you develop a story in a way that illustrates a subjectivity, but also such a closeness to the subject matter. And I wanted to know if you would be open to just speaking about why that method and how sound design specifically helps to illustrate how to communicate these topics.
Yeah, I think in particular on the sort of anthropomorphizing angle, I think there is something so fun about. So I'll give you an example. We did an episode maybe a couple weeks ago about birds, how birds navigate, and in particular all this like quantum physics that's going on in the owl's eyeballs that is so interesting and confusing. And but anyway, so we had this. So we had all these like quantum physicists as part of the episode. We had all these biologists as part of the episode. And there's this moment at the end where so it turns out birds can literally see magnetic fields. They can see them.
I love this story so much.
Oh, it's so good. I can't take credit for it. I didn't report it or anything. But they can see the magnetic field. So we, at the end, there's this biologist, and we were like, okay, but what does it look like? And he was like, I cannot speculate because of, and then he said, like, our cones are this way, and like the 20 reasons why there's no way. Like, he's like, I cannot speculate. There's no way I can speculate. It's just incapable. It's beyond our sensorium to even imagine what this is. And then there's like a 5-second pause, and he's like, okay, here's what I think it is. And it's great. It's great. It's so satisfying. That 5 seconds and the kind of jump that happens there, it's like you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. Like, you can do the scientifically accurate thing of like, no, there is no way for us to imagine this. Like, we will forever be trapped in our own brains, and they will be forever trapped in theirs. But who? That's not satisfying to hear. So let's do it. And let's do it knowing that it's a flight of fancy, kind of. And then, if you haven't listened to that episode, please do, because it's that's one of those things that you want to shout from the rooftops, because it's so beautiful, and it completely and decentering to imagine the world from a bird's eye view, literally. Yeah, no, to me, I don't know. That's the fun. It's and then the sound design, and the whole thing is super sound design. And we're so lucky to have original composers working on our staff who sound, by hand for each, it's they bespoke, sound scoring for every beat and every story. But yeah, in a way, it's kind of trying to it's have our cake and eat it too, be scientifically accurate, but also friendly and approachable and conversational, and then also but also heightened because it's sound design. So it's all these things which should not sort of work together. It's trying to harness them all together. And I feel like I didn't make the template or blueprint for it the way we do it at Radiolab. Clearly that was Jad, my mentor and basically older brother, but I think he cracked a way to be able to do all those things right next to each other, even though they're seemingly opposite from each other.
Well, I feel like each of you has a specific methodology of bringing things together that in terms of what should be, how it should be done, or how communication should be illustrated or communicated, and it's just a matter of making a choice, of being this is my method, this is how I'm approaching it, and I'm sticking by it, and I'm standing up for my own methodology. And each of you do that so specifically and so well. So maybe we can open this up to a conversation with all of us too. So I'll ask more general questions. So how do you navigate, and anyone can answer this, how do you navigate the tension between platform algorithms that might reward more sensationalist content in opposition to scientific accuracy? I know it's tricky.
I ignore the algorithms. So you're talking about, your voice, your method, the how you put the show together. And I know, historically it's all YouTube, the algorithm, and creating for the algorithm in order to be able to get your content seen and be shared. And reach, get your KPIs and your ROI, and basically get the audience reach that you want. But to me, I've found that every time I've tried to focus on those aspects of creating and putting stories together and talking about science, it is taken away from the conversation, and it's taken away from what I actually want to do. And so I do my own thing, and I don't dance to the beat of my own drummer, and maybe there are people who want to dance along with me.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, Emily.
It's just an impossible thing to chase, and also I think we've all, and this is where I kind of want to bring up the democratization thing. I think we have this misconception that because we all do it all, that's a long-term strategy, and it is not.
It's not.
You shouldn't have to be the one figuring out the algorithm. You should have people working with you. You should be in a position where you're supported to be the best version of you in the show you can be. And this is where I get just so maddening. Like I created my program with the help of like one, maybe two other people, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, Emily, you can do so much with YouTube. Look at every place you've gone. And it's like, you know how much of a struggle it's been? You know, like,
so much of a struggle.
How just like soul sucking it is to like have to do all of the work that is in the video and also like be a full-time employee at an organization where I'm expected to like do consultation with our marketing team and do all this other work in addition to making the YouTube thing. And so it's really exhausting to constantly be trying to like play this game that is using completely different rules. And like when I started in 2012, it was kind of before, I was in a good place because traditional marketing and PR was not at all taking YouTube seriously. And so it was easy to get your foot in the door and for nobody to pay attention because they're like, oh, Emily's just doing her YouTube thing or whatever. And the same was for like those major media outlets, like CNN wasn't on YouTube, and you didn't have these like huge like production companies to like put all of their effort on the platform. But as soon as people started taking it seriously, as soon as people were like, wait, 40% of your audience is outside of the United States? Wait, half of your audience is women? Wait. You know, everyone is like jumping in to like dive into the pool, and in the meantime, like, I didn't get any more money from the success of my YouTube channel. It was just constantly demonstrating my like justification for being in the room. It was like that was the use of the data that came from it, but it didn't make me a better creator. It just burned me out. Like that's why I left my full-time job with cushy benefits and like a salary. It was just impossible to do it all.
I was wondering also, you were mentioning like long form, short form, and you know, with Instagram, TikTok being all the different places, right? You can't be all the different places, and each of the places you need to tell the story slightly differently, right? I mean, you can do one piece of content and then chop it up different ways, you know, if you plan ahead. But like, do you have a strategy for how you approach the different channels? I just stopped. I'm like, I'm not going to TikTok. I refuse. I'm not doing that.
I think there's like it's really valuable to know how your skill set can be applied to the best outlet. Like I am not a TikToker. I cannot work independently in my house, and I don't want to be expected to. Like, I do my best work with scientists. I do my best work on location. There should be an infrastructure to like allow for that, to not have this like huge learning curve where you're starting your own channel while you're an undergraduate or graduate. You have that like some other kind of support. It's not like immediately as you graduate, you have like a pathway into successful science communication. It's like one scrappy job to the next, and I just wish there was more of a way to get like, I don't know, more people on PBS. Like, why are there not more chief curiosity correspondents? Because that's the sort of infrastructure that we needed for the foundation of like science communication. And I panic because like we're losing even more of these pipelines. All of them. Sorry, I don't want to dominate this, but
there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah,
seriously.
I feel like there's so much there, and also at the same time, it's like we're looking for institutional funding and institutional support, but also we have people like the two of you, Isaias and Lindsay. You both work independently. You both have a very front-facing and direct relationship with your audience through independent platforms, and that's something that's built and should be supported. And well, we could talk about that, how you are able to support yourselves, how you're able to actually market your content to the world, and also what Kiki was saying earlier, how you tailor specific content for a video as opposed to a written form, as opposed to a longer form video. You already talked a little bit about this, but yeah, anything you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with the science communication field today is, and I'm talking more about the Gen Z generations versus millennial, like the parameters I think that were set up, like our team's like, you need to be on all the platforms, and I'm like, I can only do one YouTube per week. Like I have like 4,000 subscribers. I'm not the best on there. And it's like, I also think that the corporatization of like large corporations funding these types of initiatives where people are literally working with fossil fuel industries, with big ag, with big petrochemical industries, that are literally killing the same communities that they want to advance science for. And to me, it's like, I'm not trying to attack those individuals. They have their personal story, but it is almost unfortunate that, as an independent creative too, like, and I'm speaking on the Gen Z generation, like what I'm seeing in the next generation of science communication field is the amount of pretty privilege you need to have in this space now, where brands are like, we're going to put you on Vogue, we're going to put you on these designer clothes, we're going to make you the next like public figure luminaire. And I'm like, that's the dangerous thing that literally luminaires and like revolutionary people have said back in the 60s, 70s of what was happening to these movements. And we're now like private philanthropies that are owned by billionaires, millionaires are funding these initiatives to create this grassroots change. And it's completely horrible where, having to say no to all these industries from like a scientist perspective of like, I cannot in good faith work with this industry because you are literally killing the next generation of young people I'm trying to work with. But at the same time that I make that huge sacrifice with my management, and then they're mad at me and they're like, you need to understand that you need to work with them in order to prove it. But then for me, it's like, I'd rather take 10 years longer to get there. But I am very scared for younger generations of like the new science communicators on TikTok and everything, because it's like, we're up in a new world that's like measuring us not just on how well we can speak, how much we know, but even with AI, literally like it's changing thought leadership. There are people on LinkedIn I see that I'm like, you don't use M dashes, now you started using them out of nowhere. And it's like, so now you're not just corporatizing the ways that we can aesthetically show up as a brand, but now even, I don't know like who's using AI in their thought leadership to transpire their ideas now. That scares me, and that's something I am very curious to see how it unfolds. But Lindsay, I'm very curious on your end.
Oh man. I mean, when it comes to figuring out how to present on different platforms, like it is difficult coming from an individual perspective of trying to make sure everything is completely accurate just by myself. That was really, really hard to start off, and it's still something that I struggle with. I'm building a team now, but also that comes with trusting the people on your team to get all of the information correct, and also being able to show up in a presentable way, because I'm front facing, I'm on camera. I don't really know how.
No, that's great, and I feel like. Yeah.
Oh no, but like, to what degree do you feel like you're like dancing with the algorithm? Like, to what degree are you trying to make something that you think will go crazy viral, or are you just like, this is what's interesting to me? And
Is it like ad revenue that helps support your work, or is it more like the corporate sponsorship reliability?
It's both. Yeah, it's both. And when it comes to figuring out what content I'm gonna make, I really just try to focus on what I find interesting, because then I'm gonna be passionate about presenting it. Science is so much cooler than fiction in almost every single example, and I think that there's a way to present it that feels as interesting to like the average person as this like crazy conspiracy, but everything is accurate, like 100% accurate. And so I really just try to follow what I'm passionate in learning more about, because I then assume that other people would be passionate about learning from me. I think it helps that most of my friends are not in STEM, and so I try to imagine what they would find interesting, how I would want to explain it to them, so that I can reach a pretty wide audience and not have these assumptions of what people already know.
Yeah, and there's also sorry, Kiki, did you want to jump in?
No, yeah, I was just going to ask very quickly, in terms of science communication and how it is done, do you feel like your training as a scientist gave you the tools to be a communicator or be a science communicator? Do you feel like what your goal as a communicator is? Are you able to meet that easily? Or have you been learning the skills? Because I feel like as a scientist, I did not learn the communication in my graduate program. I did not learn. I'm the world's worst communicator. Oh my gosh, but it's taken me 2 decades, more than that now, of doing this work to come to a place of like actually really understanding methodologies and seeing the communication field as something that it needs a lot of work. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely learned that along the way. I think when I started off on TikTok, I was making sure that everything was accurate, but not like I wouldn't do things the same way in in how I started off. And I think it's always going to be a learning curve, and it's kind of this path into the dark. There's not really any there's people to lean on, especially because the science communication space is growing, but everyone's growing together, and so I guess that's kind of, it's weird, yeah.
And if anybody wants to know about the Association of Science Communicators, come talk to me about it later.
Do you want to say something?
Oh no, just to Kiki's point, like I wasn't trained as a scientist, but I was trained as a historian of science, and I got a lot of great stuff out of that program. But I do feel like in the communication skills department, I feel like I had to unlearn a lot of stuff that I learned. Like I feel like it was actually really actively sending me in the opposite direction, in the passive voice, you might say. And it took a lot of work to kind of like I got a lot of skills, but then you have to you have to learn how to deconstruct and put back together a sentence, like to actually like. Yeah, right.
So we only have 5 minutes left, so we have to wrap up soon. I know, that went so quickly. And we could have gotten into a whole conversation about AI, but I have a more important question. But on the topic of AI and on the topic of these fears that we have around how science will be communicated with the development of that, I think we should just give pause and attention to the humanity that each of you bring to your platforms and the essential nature of that, and how we need to keep that alive, obviously. But I think the more important question here is what areas of science do you think are still underrepresented in digital media, and what platforms might be best suited to address them? Topics that you feel like you've been wanting to attack or address that you haven't been able to yet, more interdisciplinary ideas.
I want to see every lab. I want to see every museum collection. I want there to be more content. I don't want to be the only one making museum YouTube videos. But like in order to do that, like there's got to be the infrastructure, and it's not going to come from corporate sponsorship, and no longer is it going to come from government support. So much of my work was supported by like NSF grants, and I was supposed to spend the entire year on campus at the NIH. I found out via news article that my whole year was like, now I'm unemployed, and
they didn't even pay you for the work you'd already done.
No, they didn't, because the model is so bad. The model is so bad. You have to have an established audience before you can even bring a pitch to somebody to potentially, fund it. And I've just spent so many months of my time going through and like coming up with pitches, and you don't get paid for any of that work. You just get rejected for it. And it's like when you're coming up with a pitch for a new science series, you're not just like, that would be cool. Like you gotta do the work ahead of time to like contact the labs and make sure they're, would be interested in being a part of it. And so I wish there was more of an infrastructure for people to be able to like work with these organizations and these research labs and places without having to like either fund it themselves or rely on that corporate sponsorship piece.
Thank you. Anyone else? You're tackling all the subjects already.
I know. I talk about all the subjects. But I think one thing that I've seen growing over the last several years is the increase in the awareness of colonial practices in science. And so in addressing the way that science is done, in addressing how the conversation around science and society takes place, is why is it still science and society? It's like science with society. Society having a feedback loop so that science is responsive to the needs of society, so that science is not a top-down colonial infrastructure that tells people what they need. That the entire conversation needs to change, and I'm seeing more and more of it happening in public spaces, and scientists being open about and transparent about how they work and where their money comes from and why they're publishing certain things. But it's still an old man's club. I'd call them the silverbacks, and and science people. People talk about, the speed of trust and the speed of change, and this is my very kind of morbid way of speaking about it, but science and progress happen at the rate of funerals. I'm sorry.
No, that's very well put. Any final thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll quickly say I think supporting independent media will always go a long way. Like any collectives, like initiatives, like Patrons. I think one of the things that is really interesting is I think from our generation as content creators, sometimes we're just labeled as, oh, you're just an influencer, you're irrelevant, you're not an expert. It's like, no, I got the science background and also the lived experiences of working with these types of research. But the fact that, as much as we hate to say it, but right-wing institutions are doing a better job funding independent creators. And that's the horrible thing when we look at the Democrat left here. It's like, yes, we're going to support these pro-initiatives, but not just are the nonprofits being screwed over right now, but also we as a media landscape are really losing to so much misinformation, disinformation. And then we're thrown breadcrumbs. We're thrown these grant opportunities where you're having to compete against thousands of people for
$500.
Yeah, $500. You're just everyone loves to see free content, but nobody wants to put a price tag on it.
Everybody's passing the buck. Everybody's passing the buck. Someone's like, well, you can make ad revenue. Well, how long does it take you to build up an audience to earn ad revenue?
But now Apple's going to take 30%, and then they're going to take 50%, and what revenue's left?
It is. I mean, it's like we're joking about it, but it does feel like this is like a bloodbath of a time right now. Like for science in general, science funding, and then I think being in public radio, it's like you just every direction you look, it's quite a bleak time. And I honestly I feel like
we have to be real about it.
Go.
Here's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
thing.
yeah. It's true.
People watch me on TV and they think oh, Emily Graslie, she's all bubbly and everything. But this is what really gets me going, because we're not doing this just for fun. We're having a fun time doing it, but let's not undermine the critical value that we have with our platforms. Let's stop. We gotta just remove that we're all doing this just for shits and giggles. Where I think we're all, the reason we want to shout it from the rooftops is because existentially in the fiber of our very being, this is what drives us as humans. Why is it so hard to just get paid to do this work? Science communication, we shouldn't be the anomaly. This should be the society that we're attempting to support.
Yep.
I think that's a great place
Agreed.
to wrap up.
So ugly.
Thank you to all of these incredible thinkers. Oh, mic drop.
Mic drop.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for coming.
everyone.
That was an excellent conversation. Thanks, guys.